future they want.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was in that member's electorate about 3 weeks ago at a women's expo, and I was astonished. There were no members of the Labour Party there, but hundreds of people came up to the National Party stall at that fair, and they made it very clear to me that that member will not be in the next Parliament, because John O'Naylor, the Mayor of Palmerston North, is going to wipe the floor with him. And if you're thinking that I'm not telling the truth, have a look at I Predict, because you're at less than 50%. Mr. Speaker, I've listened to speech after speech after speech from that side of the House tonight.
Order! A point of order, Honourable Trevor Mallett.
You were going to intervene on your own behalf, sir, but to suggest that you might be thinking that the member's not telling the truth is certainly not parliamentary.
The member is correct, but he is not the first contributor to this debate who has made that error, and I've been equally handed admonishing people. But order, I'm on my feet, don't interject. So it's timely again to just remind people about pronouns and not bring the Speaker into it. John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, I wasn't bringing you into this debate at all, sir. Mr. Speaker, Speaker after Speaker after Speaker tonight has raised the issue of house prices. I'll be straightforward. The record is very clear. In 9 years of Labour government, house prices went up 96%. 96%. In 6 years of National government, they've gone up only 28%. And then we had Mr. Farfoy, who couldn't get past Walt Disney, referring to a Walt Disney Mickey Mouse budget because he doesn't understand the whole budget process. Mr. Speaker, and we've just listened to a man talking more about his electorate, but that will be the last budget speech he ever gives, because he will not be in the next Parliament as the electorate member for Palmerston North. Sir, budgeting, Mr. Speaker, is very little different to running a household bank account.
Order.
It's very simple, sir. Money comes in, it's called taxes from everybody's pocket. Money goes out, it's expenditure, and if there's a gap, there's only one thing to do: constrain the expenditure, increase the income, or borrow. And at least if you borrow, you can transfer costs over to a future generation, sir. This budget, I am very pleased to say, and the first time that I've been in this Parliament for 9 years, is predicting a surplus of about $370 million. That means more money will come into the government's coffers than goes out. It means for the first time in 9 years, and in future larger surpluses, the government is going to get an opportunity to repay debt or to engage in some extra spending. But not so much as the Labour Party or the Green members would have, because we don't want to push interest rates up because of the impact that would have on people's home mortgages, because we are conscious of that. Sir, last week's budget demonstrates New Zealand is heading in the right direction. The economy is growing and creating new jobs. Average wages are rising faster than inflation. Budget forecasts predict New Zealand growth of 4% next year, Mr. Speaker, and the creation of around 170,000 new jobs and a 7,600 increase in the real average wage over the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, this budget provides for $1 billion of new spending. That's based on a judgment call on the amount the government thinks it can spend without putting pressure on interest rates, sir. Half of this money will be used as a comprehensive $500 million package to help families. And for the first time, sir, spending on health exceeds $15 billion a year, and spending on early childhood, primary and secondary education will reach $10 billion, with an additional $3 billion on tertiary education. Sir, each of these commitments will help New Zealanders in practical ways in times of need and in support of a growing economy. We're in an enviable position compared with many other countries. So just look in contrast at the Australian budget announced the day before our one. New Zealanders, sir, have shown considerable resilience since the domestic recession that Labour left us with, which was followed by the global financial crisis and the Canterbury earthquakes. Sir, responsible management will see government debt reduced to 20% of GDP by 2019-2020, when full contributions to the New Zealand Super Fund can resume. Sir, all of us have faced some tough years, but moving about my electorate in the Wairarapa, I keep meeting optimistic people. They're in a buoyant mood and now that things are looking up, Mr. Speaker. That is not to say that some people in the electorate don't have other views. For example, a couple of ideas have been advanced locally by the Poverty Action Group. One was that a child's first birth certificate should be provided free of charge. Currently, that's $26 per birth certificate for the 60-odd thousand children, and Mr Mallard, I know they've sought your advice on this issue, for the 60,000 plus children born each year in our country. But what people don't sort out is that, OK, if we give people free birth certificates when they're first born, there's a cost. And the cost is about $1.8 million a year. To recover that money, what is going to be cut to allow that to happen? On a larger scale, I was interested in the comments of Ren Green, Chair of the Council for International Development, who on the one hand last week on radio praised the government for increasing our aid program by $200 million over the next 3 years to $600 million a year or north of that. And then he said, oh, but the program needs to be increased to $1 billion a year. We must get to 0.7 of 1% of GNI. Now, this is a typical example of people demanding particular outcomes, but never themselves, just like the opposition, saying what expenditure should be cut, which taxes should be increased. Opposition is quite straightforward about that. They want to bring in a capital gains tax. Or money could also be raised by borrowing to meet the cost of an alternative policy. But the government has to make these decisions, and it has to operate in the real world for the collective benefit for the whole community. That is what the election in September is about. It's about choosing representatives who are engaged with the community, who understand the balance of where community advantage is, and in our case we're pushing very hard health and education, security, public welfare, because it's really important that the community is driven by those things. We know, as a government, engaged with the community, that those are the areas that the community wants the government to be providing services. And that means, I would say to voters in the next election, that they must find candidates who are engaged with the community, not like list members of parliament across the chamber and those members of parliament that won't even go on the list on that side of the house, sir, because we need to find people in our electorates who are engaged with the community to come into this parliament and to reflect the community view. While I'm on that subject, and there's a lot of twittering from the tweeter in New Zealand First, that it's the party vote that determines who governs this country, and that is the most important vote. It's the party vote. And don't waste it on xenophobic parties like New Zealand First that would shut every immigrant out of this country. Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to stand by and watch this xenophobia from those people. And, sir, I am very glad I am not a Labour, Green or New Zealand First candidate in the next election. Thank you.
Sir William CO.
Mr. Speaker, that was a wasted space on the speaking slot of this House from Mr. Hayes.